Ladies and gentlemen, in just a moment you are going to hear the voice of a man who will tell you some tremendously important
Welcome
facts.
to the Reality Revolution. I'm your host, Brian Scott. And today we're returning to Dr. Frank B. Robinson and his Psychiana lessons. So far we've had 3 lessons, and they are amazing, uniquely written with a very interesting discussion of God and the living God power. Each one builds upon itself, but you don't necessarily have to listen to them in order. Each one carries unique lessons. So if this is the first time that you're listening to one of these, go ahead, give it a shot. You'll find the other ones very, very interesting. He was teaching about accessing the God power in a very unique way. And these lessons resound from the time they were written. So this is advanced course number 1, lesson 4, which we've been releasing about every 2 weeks right now. Dear friend and fellow student, now we come to lesson number 4. It is an intensely interesting lesson and is of vital importance to you in your studies. It is one of the most important lessons of them all. For the profound truths it contains are the most fundamental you have ever studied or dealt with. This is the lesson which has brought the amazing number of complimentary letters to us from all over the world. It has revolutionized the thought and life of a good many of our students and has been the cause of an entirely new vision of the creative spirit behind the universe. So study it very carefully and very thoughtfully and very earnestly. Read it over and over again. Drive home into the very core of your being the mighty truths this 4th lesson discloses. There are other lessons equally as interesting as this one, and also as dynamic, but I especially want you to grasp this one, please, for it contains the key to the others which follow later. You have come to me in your search for health, success, and happiness, and you believe that I know the way. I know that I know the way, and am now, through these lessons, showing it to you. You, of course, are in earnest in these studies. You actually want the good things of life, don't you? There are hundreds of thousands trotting around this globe who are not in the slightest degree interested in either financial success, good health, or happiness. Some of them have never tasted happiness. They do not know what it means. Others there are who don't seem to care whether they ever amount to anything or not. They live their lives, or rather they exist out their lives. And thoughts of the higher, nobler, better things of life never seem to come to them. They just simply are not interested at all. As long as they have a job which keeps them in, eats, and sleeps, they seem to be abundantly satisfied. But I don't think you are that sort of a person. I know you are not. You would not have put yourself in my hands if you had been. And now that you are in my hands for this unusual teaching, I earnestly want to show you the law, which can and will and must bring whatever right and needed things you desire into your life when this mighty creative God law is complied with. And when that happens, there can be no failure. And right here, let me say to you that if there is no desire, no real desire in the life for the better things, the chances are many to 1 against any of these better things ever manifesting. In fact, it is practically an impossibility for life's finer things to come where the earnest desire for them is absent. It is a part of the law that, first of all, the desire must be there. In your individual case, I know it is there, or you would not have enrolled with me. I do not know what in your particular case the particular need may be, nor do I care. All I'm asking at this point is that you remember that you are in earnest in your search for the law controlling every good thing life has to offer. If I thought the students who will read this would be in earnest, then I promise you it never would have been written. But it has been written, and it has gripped thousands of people all over the world, and we have not gotten off to a good start yet. For the day is coming when the truths of the God law, as this course of instruction reveals them to you, will be known all over the world. What a change will there be then? What a difference that will make. This ceaseless, and oftentimes useless struggle against poverty, ill health, unhappiness will be a thing of the past in the life of the one knowing how to utilize the God law as Jesus understood and used it. He had no monopoly on this law. This was the message he came to preach, the universality of the God law. But the people wouldn't have it then. It has taken 2,000 years for the people to get the first faint inkling of what this mighty God law actually is. And mighty few of them know yet. And in the meantime, thousands of men and women have turned in disgust from what has been offered to them in the name of God, knowing that such ridiculous doctrines and dogmas never could do anything material and lasting in life, perhaps after death, but not in life. All that is changing, however, and as this teaching goes on its way around the world, the eyes of men and women are being opened to the actual truths of God, and as ever, when natural or spiritual law is compiled with, the results are sure. I have purposely stopped here for a moment on our journey together and have reconnoitered for a few moments just to look the land over and see where we stand to date. I am to show you the workings of the God law behind the universe and show you how to apply it in your own life for health, success, and happiness. You in turn are deeply in earnest in this entire matter. You really want to be a success. You really do want to get out of the rut and away from the don't cares. And you actually want and desire to find the better things of life. If you are a married man or woman, you want that home. You want that car. You want that account in the bank. You want that life insurance. And above all, it may be that you want that domestic happiness. In other words, you want to be an all-around success with the needs of your individual life supplied. The proper needs, of course. So at this point, we are agreed as to where we stand. You have done the little exercises I have prescribed for you faithfully. That is exactly what I want you to do. Perhaps you have not understood them at all, but that is perfectly all right at this point. If you have done them as I directed you, a little later on, you will understand just what these exercises are designed to do. You will know what they really are and for what purpose I prescribed them. But now, however, you just do them exactly as I ask you to. Remember, you are the student and I am the teacher. I know what I am doing and talking about, and you want to know. All right, then, faithfully follow me. And remember, as you follow me in the marvelous lesson, that we are not studying a fairy story in any sense of the word. We are studying the story of this world and its creator. We are also to study something else. We are to study the most marvelous creation God ever made, you, man or woman. Let me interpolate here long enough to suggest you be very sure of your ground before we progress any farther along the line of these studies. If you are not so clear on any point, or if for some reason or other you have not done the exercises, then may I suggest that you start at the beginning, and this time do them. Those of my students who are the most earnest will be the most anxious to do these things. But no matter how intensely interesting these lessons are from a historical and literary standpoint, I am afraid that it will take much more than just a reading of them to achieve many results. So, being in earnest, you want the truth, and I will give it to you. In dealing with this immense subject of this world's creator and its created marvel, man and woman, I realize, of course, the utter impossibility of doing it the justice I should like to. I could probably write year in and year out on this subject, but it is necessary now that I condense as much as possible and put the vital truths of this course of religious instruction into as few words as possible. You will at once recognize their dynamic power, however, and on applying the principles as I give them to you, you will find that they work. So follow me closely, for it has taken me a lifetime of study and thought to formulate and prove the facts that I am now writing down on a piece of paper for you to read. I'm not attempting to write these things in a scholarly manner at all, nor shall I introduce scientific terms. I am writing for the man on the street, the man who needs them most. I want that fellow to grasp what I am talking about, Hence, the use of highbrow terms will never be found in anything coming from my pen, no matter where it appears. The big businessman in his swell office probably has not the same need for these truths that you have, and as many of my students will be just ordinary everyday fellows like I am, my wording and expression will be understood by them. In fact, this whole course of instruction is written so that even a child can understand it. I have been asked many times to analyze the power and grip my writings exert, and I think my answer to that question and request has always been to the effect that the reason why these lessons grip is because they contain the truths of God, written so that anyone can comprehend them. And in passing once more, let me say to you that wherever and whenever you find a truth of God, you will instantly recognize it for such, and you will invariably find that such truth is so plain that even a child can understand it. I have always claimed that the creative God law behind the universe has been lost sight of an account on the simplicity of its operation. The greatest truths in life come from the mouths of little children, and the great underlying truths of God are unmistakably plain when the attention of the earnest seeker is directed into the proper channel. So in this entire course of lessons, please remember that I am writing them very plainly and am giving you the very best that is in me. And as I pass these mighty truths along to you, I want you to rise to them, line up your life with the great fundamental God law. I want you to know for the first time in your life, perhaps, what true success, true health, and true happiness really are. And man will never know any of these things until the God law operates in his life. When it does so operate, no heights are too great to be attained. In your own case, there's not much limit to what may be done. Remember this. These lessons, as you will very shortly see, have come to me through the great source of all truth. Therefore, they cannot be wrong. They must and do contain the truth. Had they not contained the vital, living truth, both myself and Psychiana would never have found even public attention. As it is, this teaching will probably be one of the greatest forward religious movements this world has seen for a good many years. Now, in this fourth lesson, don't attempt to read or study if you are liable to be disturbed. I should like you to have at least 1 hour in which your time is absolutely your own. Get into a quiet, restful, and relaxed mood, and get into an expectant mood too, for this lesson contains lots of spiritual power for those who can recognize it. In preparing your mind for the beginning of the understanding of the mighty dynamic God law, let me say you hear that the idea of God, which I shall give you, will, in all probability, upset your previous ideas of who and what God or this God law actually is. Instead of it being some distant power which might do something for you after you die, you will find a very present and self-existent power which can do something real for here and now, which of course is much better than having it in the future. You are sure of the life you are living now, and you are also sure that had you the many benefits and blessings of life, you could enjoy them. But you are not at all sure of the future. Not a single soul can prove that there is any future. Many try to tell us of a home of bliss to be enjoyed after we die and in some future life, but that cannot be proven. It is only what they think. So shall we confine our operations of the God law to the here and now, letting the future take care of itself? I think that will be better, don't you? Now, just a word of explanation as to your religious beliefs, which, by the way, I know nothing of. Probably most of my students have long since discarded the old orthodox idea of God, which is a good thing. For if one were to try and get a definite explanation of who and what God really is from the many differing sects, etc., claiming to know God, I am afraid one would have a wonderful time doing it. For every preacher in the world, there is a different definition of God. There are 3,000 differing sects and denominations operating in our land today, and each is convinced that the rest of them are all wrong. They have the truth and no one else has it. Unless you find their God in their own prescribed manner, you can't find him at all. In my mind, however, there is a mighty big question as to whether any of them have seen the light as it exists. You can form your own opinion, however, when these lessons are finished. You will then have a pretty good idea of who is right, the differing religious organizations, or I. It's pretty hard to reconcile the differing conceptions of God with the truth as it exists, and sometimes I wonder how it could have possibly been that religious idolatry has taken the place of dynamic God law. But such seems to be the case. However, no matter what your religious persuasion is, remember, you have agreed to lay it on one side for the time being. Running through all systems of religious instruction the world has ever seen, there is, like a silver thread, the truth. The system may be 99% error, and it probably is. There is some truth in every system of religion, no matter where it originated and who originated it. The world has been, to date, many crucified saviors. Long before the Christian Savior appeared, there had been many others, and their followers, of course, all considered their own Savior the only one who really was a combination of God and a man. I won't spend any time discussing all these other saviors at this point, any more than to say they were all supposed to be a mysterious combination of God with some man. They were all supposed to have some miraculous thing. Most of them were crucified. They all rose from the dead, and they all came into the world to save people from their sins. There have been enough divine saviors down through history to save a dozen worlds, including this one. That is, of course, if their claims were true. Unfortunately, however, their claims were not true, as history also shows. The point I want to make, however, is that the man who was considered to be God and a man in combination was usually a very bright thinker and a man with deep insight into the spiritual law. Not always, but usually so. Some of the most brilliant and elevating of sayings came from the mouth of Confucius. In the case of the Christian religion, its prophet, one Jesus, was no more than a man. If I had the time, I could convince you that this statement is a fact and could convince you beyond any shadow of a doubt. But at the same time, the man Jesus knew what spiritual law was, and to a wonderful degree, he had a grasp on the truths of the God law that very few have ever had either before or since that time. So I'm going to take that man and use him, probably because you are more familiar with that story than you are with the story of any of the other world's crucified saviors. And in dealing with this man, I shall show you the staggering import of the truths he saw and used. And mighty truths they are too. It is interesting here to note that never did Jesus Christ say he was God. At no time did he ever make such a claim. To the contrary, he claimed the very opposite. Did he not say that the things he did, you and I should do also? Did he not say that? Did he not ask why anyone should call him God? Many, many times he specifically claimed not to be God, to the exclusion of the rest of the human race. The church is the organization which tacked divinity on to Christ, and by so doing they absolutely killed his message. Had the church left him as a man, as he claimed to be, and not tacked onto him the nonsensical resurrection from the dead and the equally nonsensical, unprovable ascension into a place called heaven, what a difference it would have made, wouldn't it? But by introducing a story that he was God, and therefore possessing a power which no one else can possess, they just simply took him away out of reach of the common folks like you and me, and placed him on a pedestal where he never belonged. And further than that, they robbed mankind of every chance of ever doing the things that he did. If Christ were God, then there can be no possible chance of you or I ever duplicating his words. If he were but a man, however, in full time, the God law, which I claim, then there is every chance of every man using the same God law as he used to do whatever is needed in life. And what a different light this throws on things, does it not? Just think for a moment. Suppose there were existing now a great spiritual law more than sufficient to make possible every proper desire of the human heart. Wouldn't that be a very welcome power? Well, friend, that is the message of the Christ. That is the message he came to bring. That and nothing more. His message was totally one telling the power of the God law. His message was completely limited to the telling of the actual, literal, physical, and spiritual results to be obtained through the application of this mighty God law. And he proved that he knew how to call into play this self-same law that I am telling you of. Diseases disappeared. The blind received their sight again. The deaf had their hearing restored. The lame walked. The hungry were fed, we are told. And it is my contention that this same power exists today and for that very purpose. True, it is the religiously inclined that will laugh at it. They tell us that we cannot know the spiritual God law until we die. No, they cannot tell me that though for I know better, and before you have gone very far on your way with me, you will know better also. But just suppose that I do know what I am talking about. Just suppose that this is such a power as that easily available here and now. Do you think such a power would make any difference in your life? I think it would. And take it from me, whoever you are, that is the fact of life as it exists today. That was the truth Jesus proclaimed, and for which we are told they killed him. Never did he take any credit to himself. It was ever first, last, and all the time God. And that is the way it is with Psychiana today. First, last, and all time God. To us, however, God is a spiritual law. It operates here and now and is the greatest operating law or power this world has ever seen or known. And it hasn't known much about this power to date either. It's learning through, and as this teaching of mine and its accompanying power continues to go around the world, so will men and women begin to learn something about their self-existent, present, immutable, dynamic God law. And knowing the operation of that law, their every want will be supplied, and their every right desire will be fulfilled by and through the operations and existence of this mighty God law, which is God. So shall we look for a little while now at what Jesus said about this mighty God law? I shall ask you to go back to the story of the woman of Samaria at the well of Jacob. You will remember that this carpenter man had asked her for a drink of water. In the conversation which followed, he made a positive and definite assertion that God is spirit. He did not say God is a spirit at all. A search of the oldest text here will disclose the fact that the article is not in there at all. It was interpolated or added to make sense out of the statement, according to the ideas of translators of this chapter. Instead of making sense out of the statement, however, they made complete nonsense and destroyed the entire meaning of the verse. More than that, they destroyed the definition of God as Jesus gave it. As a matter of fact, no one can tell the harm these translators did through the interpolation of their own ideas as to just how these scriptures should read. While passing, it might be as well to call attention to the fact that there has never been known to exist one single original manuscript covering the Bible story. This fact is not published by the church folks, and many of them may question this statement, but it is a fact. Not one single original manuscript covering this Bible story has ever been known to exist. Even the authorship of the four Gospels is absolutely unknown. It is known that at least 3 of them were not written by the men whose titles they bear. And it is a further fact that no one knows who actually did the writing of them. If they were not written by the church itself, all that has ever existed on the New Testament are copies and copies of copies. But of original manuscripts there are none. Nor have there ever been any known to exist. In view of this fact, I am of the opinion that too much dogmatism concerning the divinity of the scriptures is certainly quite out of the order. The story may be taken on faith, but there certainly is no evidence of its truth as far as authentic proof of the existence of any original manuscript goes. I shall not enlarge upon the subject here, though, as my magazine, Psychiana Quarterly, goes into this phase very fully. Let me say a word or two to the warring church factions here, though, and here it is. If you would only understand that the men who translated this Bible were ordinary, everyday human beings, just like you and me. If you would only understand they were only educated up to the light of their time. then it seems to me that you would not care what interpretation were placed on the story, or the creation of man, provided, of course, that this interpretation were reasonable. We know full well that the mighty creative intelligence behind this universe did not make a man from a mixture of spit and earth. We know that, and all the religiously inclined could not make us believe that it did. We also know that no God caused a deep sleep to come upon man, and then, while fast asleep, removed one rib and made a woman out of it. We know that did not happen. But what difference does it make whether a man's creation took 1 second of time or 10 million years? What difference does it make whether man began his existence as a humble amoeba, progressing through the millions of ages until his present stage was reached, or whether he was instantly made in 1 second of time? That is not what matters, my friends. What actually matters is this: what message have you from your God to the man on the street here and now? If you and your brethren cannot agree as to whether the story you depend on is true or not, then how do you expect to convince the man on the street that it is true? If you continue to war and fight between yourselves as to whether or not Jesus Christ was God, and if you cannot agree on the subject, then what light is the man on the street going to get from you? How is he going to know? You may depend upon one thing, though, and that thing is that the men who deciphered these old anonymous manuscripts you call the Word of God were 100% human men. You may depend upon another thing also. You may depend upon it that the men who wrote them were 100% human also. And this being a fact, these men, whoever they were certainly subject to human limitations. So if I were you, I believe I should quit squabbling amongst yourselves and try to get down to the basic fundamental facts concerning the living God, as he exists and operates here and now. For unless the church does quit its squabbling and get down to actual facts concerning God, you will find that the revelations which should come through you will come through men and women who make no profession of religion at all. And this is exactly what is happening now, and the church has no one to blame but itself. I have digressed a little bit here. Please excuse it, and we shall go back to where we were. To say a spirit should have been implying the existence of more than one spirit, and Jesus did not do this. So then we have the plain statement from one who certainly knew that God is spirit. A very plain and definite statement, and one that is quite understandable, I am sure, and how that statement opens up like a rose the entire scriptures when fully grasped. The next thing incumbent upon us then, in order to have an intelligent explanation of what God is to find out what spirit is. Now, if you want to know the meaning of any word, where would you go to get the definition of it? To the dictionary, I believe. So there is exactly where we shall go. I think perhaps Webster is the accepted authority today, so we shall quote him. His definition is in effect that spirit is life or intelligence conceived of entirely apart from physical embodiment. What is that? Let me repeat the statement, for it is very dynamic. Webster said that spirit was life or intelligence conceived of or capable of existence of being without physical form. Here we are getting down to something definite about God. We have a definition of terms. We are not accepting that someone else told us. That definition is corroborated through entire scriptures. So for the purpose here, I shall take it as it stands. There are, of course, many other things that God is, but before he could have been any of these other things, he must needs have been life first. I wish I could drive that statement home to you. Let me repeat it once more. Before God could have been any of the other things that he is, he must needs have been life first. And without life, all the other things that he is would be as naught. Had he not been life, he never could have been anything else. So for a while, I shall concentrate on the accepted fact that God is spirit, and the spirit is life capable of existence without physical form. In other words, God is invisible life. It will take you a long time to fully grasp that statement, my friend. You will not grasp it overnight. But when you do grasp it to the full, you will begin to understand a little bit just what God really is. And more than that, just where he is. Try and imagine this living God, the most dynamic power in the universe, being all around you in the air, so to speak, in the very room in which you are listening to this, but indiscernible to you in your present state of consciousness. That is the exact fact of the presence of God. He is not hidden away in the sky somewhere, nor does he hide and operate from some remote portion of your brain through your subconscious mind either, nor are his manifestations made known through the medium of your sympathetic nervous system or anything on that order. Never believe such twaddle as that is. This living dynamic power, this mighty living God, is in the very air you breathe. Not, of course, as one of the chemical constituents of the air, but living in it, and yet not a part of it. Can you grasp what I mean? I'm sure you can. Many scientists on the verge of this mighty truth have stated there is thinking substance in the ether all around us. It is more than that. This statement completely revolutionizes the entire understanding of God as we have it today. You must make a clean-cut distinction here, though, between God's actually living in any part of your physical body and his actual presence there. To say that God dwells in you as a body would be grossly wrong, for as a spirit, he could not inhabit a material body. But to say that God dwells within you and at the same time has positively no physical connection with you at all is stating the truth as it actually exists. Many psychologists find it is hard to do this, so they immediately go on the assumption that God himself, or some attribute of himself, actually lives and operates through the brain and spinal column or some other part of human mechanism. Such a statement, however, is grossly misleading and is false in its entirety. Furthermore, God has no attributes which might so operate. He has no mind he cannot have, nor is there any such thing as God mind or God consciousness or a God anything else. There cannot be, because God is, not God has. Do you see that? There's a little book published by the Unity School of Christianity at Kansas City, Missouri, and written by H. Emil Cady. The book is called Lessons in Truth. I should like to have every student of mine, when he has finished these lessons, send for that book. It gave me a lot of help in my early metaphysical studies, and while I do not agree with Mrs. Cady in many things she teaches, I can and do agree with her on many other points. When I saw the flock of geese flying high in the sky and filling the air below with their honks, I saw God in actual operation through an immutable law, law is God, that geese should fly. And when I saw this little robins building their nests, I saw God in operation through an immutable law made ages ago, which law required that little robins mate, build their nests, and produce more little robins. And when I went into the bedroom and looked upon the sleeping form of my little Alfred, I saw God in actual operation through an immutable law he made ages ago, which law ordained that the human race should propagate their own kind. And in the sleeping form of my little Alfred, I saw the results of that same law still operating thousands and perhaps millions of years later. But it would be the rankest kind of folly and untruth were I to state to you that either the living creative God himself or any of his supposed attributes were actually living in or operating through the brain and spinal column of either the boy, the geese, or the little robins. Man's brain has given to him to control the functions of the physical body only. The same thing applies to the brains of the geese, the robins, and the little boy, and you may depend upon it. No God as such operates personally through any flesh of any kind, nor did the creative life or intelligence of God ever come down to this earth and occupy the body of any human being to the exclusion of all others. As spirit, he could not possibly have done that in the body, but not of it. The common idea of God held by the church people of today seems to be that of some personality who dwells in a home in heaven and who is now up there checking and perhaps rechecking on us, making notes of all of our actions down here. At some future time, we are told, we should come back to life again and shall stand in a court of judgment, and those of us who do not measure up to a certain standard will be everlastingly punished. Those who do, however, will be everlastingly rewarded. Well, I have no quarrel at all with those who care to hold such a theory as that. Their outlook on life and their future must of necessity be very stunted, though, and certainly it is that which prospects ahead of them. They can never attain very much happiness in this life. The statement, however, to put it mildly, is erroneous, but all that will appear later. The point I want to send home to you now is that God is invisible life. In Him we live and move and have our being, and would be manifestly impossible if God were in heaven or any other place removed from His creation. The stunning fact is that you could not take another breath without God, not without God's help, but without this mighty creative life spirit. A sparrow cannot fall to the ground without Him. The wild geese would get lost without Him. The lily on the mountainside could not grow without Him. The little robins might raise baby scorpions without Him. Not without the subconscious mind, but without Him. Do you begin to see what I mean? This mighty life spirit, the supreme intelligence, is everywhere, right here in the room in which I am writing this, and so close to me that in Him I press down these typewriter keys and send this message to you. And if I were to leave the room, I should not take Him with me out of the room. He would still be here after I had gone. It is very important that you grasp the fact of the nearness and actual presence of the most dynamic power and intelligence and life all around you at your call, and more than able to provide for you whatever may be necessary to your complete health, success, and happiness. In the room next to the one in which I am writing this lies my 8-year-old son Alfred. I have just gone and kissed him, the little fellow, for I love him more than I do my life. There lies that little body in all intents and purpose, as far as he only a name. You cannot see a name. So what is it that I actually saw lying there in that little bed? Shall I tell you? Lying there in that little bed, my friend, I saw not Alfred, but the mighty immutable God law in actual operation. This and nothing more. Some psychologists would have us believe that every tree, every blade of grass, every piece of rock, every piece of metal, in fact, everything in the universe, is what they call a manifestation of the universal mind, whatever they may be. I've explained once that mind has nothing to do with it. And again, I must ask you to disabuse yourself of the idea, if you hold it, that any mind of any sort manifests in any animate or inanimate object on this earth. This is not the explanation. The reason the trees grow is because away back yonder in the beginning, the God law ordained that they should grow. And as a matter of fact, it caused them to grow. And they can no more refuse to grow in violation of the immutable God law than can you or myself. And the reason that the beautiful white lily blooms and grows on the hillside is because away back yonder in the beginning, before lilies ever grew before, this same eternal and ever-present God law commanded them to grow, not because of the power of mind had anything to do with it, but because this great, immutable, never-changing life spirit capable of existence without bodily form caused it to be so. That is the reason. In other words, this great life spirit made an absolutely inviolable law that out of the single ear of wheat should grow hundreds of years. And that is the reason the farmer knows that when he plants grain, he will reap grain, and not jack pines, nor cactus. When the first wild goose was placed here upon this earth, the mighty creative life spirit that created the goose implanted within that goose, or caused it to react to an immutable God law, which immutable law guides it from one part of the earth to another. And that is the reason it cannot be fooled. And when the first pair of red-breasted robins was placed by this mighty creative life spirit on this earth, they were ordered to comply with the God law covering their existence and to mate and produce other robins. And that is the reason they cannot produce scorpions. I said they cannot, for the law is immutable. And when the first pair of the human race away back yonder in the beginning lost whatever spiritual estate they once had, if they had one, they were commanded to exist as physical beings, reproducing their kind, and were commanded to grow as we are growing today. And that is the reason we are as we are. And that is the reason we exist at all. Not because of God's spitting in the earth and making a man, but because it is the immutable God law that we should be. In other words, as Alfred, so are we, a direct action product of this mighty life spirit. Yes, and more than that, my friend, we are the very greatest manifestation this God power ever had or made. Think that over. Living in the midst of this mighty God law and yet separated from it. That is the situation as it exists in the human race today. So you see, the matter of finding the God law is not going to be as hard as you may have imagined it might be. The fact of the matter is that it is harder to get away from this mighty law than it is to find it. Please try to grasp the fact of this living, creative God power being all around you and at your disposal and directly available to you for the actual manifestation of whatever proper things you may need, no matter what they may be. Try, I say, to grasp this mighty fact, for that is exactly the condition in which you live. There is at your disposal all the power of the Godhead for the manifestation of whatever it may be that you must stand in need of, whether wealth, health, or happiness. You would not attempt to tell me that the mighty God law, which caused this created scheme of things to be in the first place, and which momentarily sustains them, could not or would not lend its aid to one of its created beings, would you? It would be useless for you to try to tell me that I know better. Had you been taught this fact when you were a child, you would have accepted it without question, and the chances are many to one that you would have been far more prosperous, healthy, and happy than you are now. But you were not taught that. You were taught that God was some great power living up in the sky, and not until after you were dead could you know anything about him. You were taught that you came into this world as a lost, guilty, and hell-deserving sinner, and that unless a certain thing happened to you, you would go down to a terrible doom. What the doom would be and what would save you from it depended, of course, on whatever system of supernaturally revealed religion you were brought up amongst. But suppose that from your earliest childhood, you had been given the picture of God that I am giving you now. Suppose that you had been raised to know that instead of this mighty creator only operating after you die, you actually lived and operated for your benefit here and now. How much better would your life have been? This is the point at which I clash with the many differing systems of religion. I have no use for the theory that God has left his creation alone until after we die. I don't believe it, and I know better. I have again digressed here a little bit, and I shall ask you to excuse it, please. Now, where were we? Well, we find ourselves surrounded on every hand with a power, an omnipotent power, so creative and so dynamic that in the beginning you may place it where you will. This power was of sufficient intelligence and wisdom and stability and omniscience to create the very first life germ, if there ever were a first life germ. Personally, I don't think there was, for it is my own personal opinion that this great God law is self-existent and has been before the beginning of time. Here you are then surrounded by an intelligent law or intelligence capable of stepping into the picture before you were a fetus, and in 9 months' time make a complete human being out of you. Don't you think that is some power? Don't you think that such an intelligence is capable of taking complete charge of your future and providing you with whatever it is you need? Don't you think that such an intelligence can provide you with that car or that home or that bank account or perhaps that domestic happiness you so much crave? I think it can. Yes, I know it can. And if it be that this revelation of God is upsetting you previous views and ideas of him, then I ask you, which is most valuable to a man today? A God who only does things after you die, or a God who is a personal entity and who does things for one here and now, when you know you can appreciate them? Which, and I know your answer. At this very moment, my secretary has just walked into my office with a letter. "Did you read this letter?" she asked. I replied, "No, let me see it." Here is the letter, and I'm going to quote it in full, for it just fits beautifully with the thought you're getting now. Furthermore, the very last lesson read this last week was the one which evidently did the trick. Does this power actually exist? You ask. Well, here is the letter for the word. It comes from the Philadelphia and is dated November 24th, 1931. Not so very long ago, is it? Dear Dr. Robinson, what a change. Only the third lesson, and here I am, changed from a living death of an activity to an office full of men. Plenty of work that a man needs. Do I believe in the power of the living God? I should say I do. Please hold lessons until I get over the dizziness of it all and get a proper address. Very sincerely, your student. This and many similar letters come to me in the course of a week, and they all tell the same story. Wherever this mighty ever-present power, this God law, is used, it brings results. Sometimes the first lesson does the trick. Other times it takes the whole course before the student grasps something of the operation of this mighty power. And please remember here that this power is no personality. It never was a personality, and it never will be a personality. It has, however, a personal existence for you and me, but it is a law. It is the God law I am now teaching you how to find and use. Now, just a word about your mental attitude. I will explain fully a little bit later about the exercises before you go to sleep. In the meantime, keep on relaxing exercise at night. Put all clocks and other noisy things from the room if you can. Lie as limp as a log, for this is the very best way to rest the body and restore it. Have no thoughts in your mind except one. Stay in that limp condition, looking at the inside of your eyelids and absolutely motionless until you see the bright area in your range of vision. Keep looking at that spot until you go to sleep. There will automatically come to you in these moments of resting and relaxation the thought that is uppermost in your nature. Mind you, I do not say in your mind, but in you as you really are. I want you now to think about the thing you need in life more than anything else. Just let that thing center on the bright area. Lie there absolutely like a log and think about the needed thing that you want the mighty God law to bring to you. Then still, absolute motionless, linger your thought on this one thing. No effort is required at all, for you are resting and will soon be asleep. Then after you have dwelt on this one thing, you need more than anything else, let this little sentence run through your mind and keep your vision on the bright spot. Here is the little sentence I want you to use and remember. Only let it be a thought. Don't whisper or utter a syllable, for I want you to forget that you have a physical body at all for the time being. Then let this thought run through you. I am finding the power of the living God law. Let this thought continually run through you, and the first thing you know, you will be asleep. Then, through the day, in earnestness, do the same thing. Whenever and wherever you have the opportunity, let your predominant thought be the same sentence, and then keep eternally at it. I am finding the power of the living God law. It takes no effort at all, and it may seem simple, but the power behind it is dynamic. Don't question this or any other exercises that I prescribe. I know what I am talking about, and you will know what I do pretty quick. I will say, however, that you are getting to the law where you will begin to understand a little bit how this mighty God law works and what it is. Remember, you are a physical being, and you are trying to find the creative God law, and this law, being a spiritual law, will be contracted by spiritual means. It lies in an unseen realm. Remember that, please. Its manifestation will be made physically to you, but your initial contact with this God law will be made in and through the spiritual realm. Don't forget this, and do these exercises. In the next lesson, we will go deeper into this mighty subject, and you will learn some things that may possibly open your eyes a little wider. It will be a good thing to read this lesson every night before retiring, and then go right to your good night exercises in finding this mighty power, which is to bring to you the things you need. Whenever you know how to supply the law in your own life, remember there is no limit to this mighty power, and remember also the power is for you. So I realize that anybody that has been a regular listener of the podcast will say, hey, Brian, this contradicts with some of your other teachings. For instance, Neville Goddard saying that God is within the skull or God is within the body. I do not think that those things contradict. God is in ever-present, and I believe in different forms. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. You are the Son, and the Father is within you, and the Holy Ghost is the Spirit he's talking about. So don't worry about those contradictions. He is talking about accessing the God law, and has some unique exercises to access the Spirit in both sleep and through affirmation. So don't worry about his assertion that you are not God, because everything, as Neville Goddard says, is God. There is a differentiation that he is making, that this power, the law, is outside of you. It is in the air that you breathe. It is obviously in your body when you breathe air. So his idea that God is not in you is not true. If God is all around you, of course, God's aspect is within you. You are the Elohim, which is not God as you understand it originally from the old Bible, but multiple gods. We all have God-like power within us, which we are awakening, which is in agreement with this living God. And as we come to a sort of relationship in agreement with our own unique consciousness in relation to the living God, that is infinite intelligent energy. That is the living intelligence that we are interacting with. Of course, it is running through us and it is a part of us, and we are awakening to that power. This is the power that we're using that comes from within. So as I've read the other lessons, I have definitely found in applying these, the contradiction is not super important. He is giving you an understanding of the living God law. And so if you continue, you can still utilize these other assertions that we're using. They do not contradict. But in any case, if you've tried out the practices and exercises that he's given so far, it's so simple, but you start to see that bright light when you're laying there like a log, and you start to see this thing come into form, and you start to believe in it, and you start to access it. It's a slow process, but you start to unveil this access to this living God law. And so this is still very important. Choose to do with this information as you will. I think it's powerful, and you do want to know how to use this law. I think it's clearly demonstrated in his lessons here. So let me know what you think. I would love to know what your opinions are in the first 3 lessons. If it doesn't work for you, I get it. I understand. I'd still like to know if anybody's had success, like the letter that he gives in this lesson. If you've had some changes, major changes in your life, put them in the comments. I want to know if I'm wasting my time with this, or if this is something that is really helping you. In any case, all episodes of The Reality Revolution can be found at therealityrevolution.com. And welcome to The Reality Revolution.
Return you now to your local announcer.